Veterans Day for a lot of people is a day off, and for the people who do get the day off, among them are weapons manufacturers, and people like the CEO of Northrop Grumman, or the CEO of Lockheed Martin. These people get paid in the tens of millions of dollars, and they basically don't work when you compare what they're doing to the work of soldiers in the field. The soldiers that we employ to fight our wars, when they come back to the United States, a lot of times are just thrown aside. The profiteers, the war profiteers, have already extracted the value that they can get from the soldiers by arming them, decking them out, and sending them to battle. And by the time that they come back from war, there's really not much profit left in a soldier. So the government basically throws them aside. Soldiers don't really make that much money, considering the types of threats they have to face and the potential that they have to die from their service. What they receive is really not enough, and a lot of times they don't get out with clean papers. So even the benefits that were promised to them ahead of combat, they don't receive that. But war profiteers, people like Wesley Bush, who are the CEOs of Northrop Grumman, he got $19 million last year. $19 million. Think about, how many veterans you could take care of who are literally, physically sleeping in the streets, in the gutters, with $19 million. But that $19 million, it's not going to go to soldiers, People like Wesley Bush, they get no-bid contracts to send our soldiers overseas to die. Meanwhile, Northrop Grumman is like providing armored vehicles and ATVs and bullets, bombs, and body bags. Basically, our country is run by these war profiteers who create wars out of nothing by an effect called blowback. You might not be familiar with this military term, blowback, but it's a term that's referred to in military contracting circles. It's the effect of selling weapons to people who then turn those weapons against you. Blowback is what has happened over and over again in the history of our country, because we arm people like the Afghanis, like the Iraqis, like the Syrians. We bring them weapons. We arm the people in these countries, and then they turn those weapons against us. But that effect, blowback, is counted. It's accounted for. In essence, these military contractors already know that the weapons that we're selling to them will be used against Americans. And by accounting for that ahead of time, they essentially insulate themselves from that effect. So we, the United States, we sell weapons to other countries, even though we know those countries are going to turn those weapons against us. That's part of what America does. And we very, very highly reward the military industrialists who are manufacturing those weapons and selling them abroad. We, the taxpayers, pay millions and millions of dollars to weapons manufacturers who then sell those weapons to foreign countries that use them against American citizens. Now, this isn't just like a once in a while sort of thing. This happens over and over again in the United States history. I mean, just about any conflict that you want to research, you'll find United States weapons manufacturers sold weapons to the battlefield, which those weapons were then turned against us. And they kind of mock it in movies like Iron Man. They glorify Stark Enterprises for selling weapons to other countries, and then those weapons being used against him directly. And it's It's glorified in the movies, but it's horrifying in real life. In real life, it's horrifying to think that American-made weapons are used against United States soldiers, and then the soldiers are thrown away just like the weapons are. But that's kind of the nature of our country, and we as American citizens don't really talk about it. We don't acknowledge it or think about it, and for the most part, it's not important to us. But I'll tell you what, blowback and the effects of selling weapons to other countries is horrifying. It's horrifying to think that those weapons are going to be used against us. But what's even more horrifying than that is that somebody's making money off of that. A very small group of people are making money off of the sales of weapons to other countries. And a lot of those weapons, it's illegal to use those weapons inside of our country. Like the weapons that we sell to other countries, if we ever use those weapons, we would be brought up on war crimes charges for using them. But it's okay with us to sell them to other countries for them to use against their civilians. An example of that would be serrated handcuffs. The United States is the #1 manufacturer of serrated handcuffs. We manufacture handcuffs that slice into people's wrists once you put them on those people. It's considered a device of torture, and it's unethical. Like we as a civilized country would never use serrated handcuffs because it's considered torture. But we're happy to make millions of dollars off of selling them to other countries. You know, it's something that you're not going to hear NPR, ABC, CBS, CNN, or Fox News, any of those news agencies talking about war profiteering. They'll never talk about it. You know, this is why I'm always saying our country is full of yellow journalists, because they won't talk about things like war profiteering, and they won't talk about things like veterans neglect. You know, it's sickening. It's sickening that we live in a country that's more willing to talk about, you know, our president playing golf. We're more willing to talk about our president playing golf than we are to talk about war profiteering. Because that's essentially the #1 profit sector of our country. That's the area that makes more money in our country than any other part, is weapons manufacturing. You know, we essentially have a dollar backed by the machine gun standard. At one point we had like the gold standard, but we don't have the gold standard anymore. Now what we have in essence is a machine gun standard. It says our dollar is worth something because we produce more weapons than anyone else in the world, and there's a market for those weapons. It's hard to think about on Veterans Day because, you know, our soldiers directly have to face weapons that we manufacture inside of our own country. Our soldiers, our veterans, have to be fired on by weapons that were made by their own countrymen. That's the nature of war profiteering, is that our countrymen have to face weapons that we manufacture. That's the nature of our country. That's the condition of the country that we live in. And again, because of national security interests, you'll never hear this talked about on the news. They'll never talk about weapons manufacturing and how weapons manufacturing is the backbone of our economy. But it is, and the taxpayers pay for it. But, you know, while the taxpayers are paying for weapons manufacturing, we won't pay for care for the elderly, you know, nationalized medicine, education, infrastructure, any number of other things we will not pay for. But weapons manufacturing, we pay for over and over and over again. You know the term forced obsolescence? It says that something that's manufactured won't be useful for long because it'll have to be replaced by something more modern, newer, and better. Well, there is no place where forced obsolescence is more engaged than in the military. In the military, the weapons that we manufacture and use are already obsolete, and we have to replace them constantly. But in order to justify replacing them, we have to use them. And that's why our country is always at war, always sending our soldiers over to other countries to die for resource extraction. And honestly, the resource extraction is somewhat of a smokescreen, because it's less about resource extraction and more about war profiteering. It's more about how many Black Hawks we can produce, how many Warthogs we can produce, Tomahawk missiles, stealth bombers, or drones these days. But that's a topic for a whole other stream. But I just want you guys to think a little bit about the CEOs out there of these weapons manufacturing companies. Because right now, CEOs like Wesley Bush, they'll never have to face war. They'll never, ever have to face the horrors of war. And they take millions and millions of dollars in profit off of no-bid contracts handed out by our government, our tax dollars. They take all those millions of dollars while sending our soldiers off to die in foreign fields under fire from weapons that we manufacture. That's the country we live in. And again, this is something that you're not going to hear reported on by the media. They're not going to talk about weapons manufacturing. They're not going to talk about it because it's considered a national security issue. So they won't talk about how weapons manufacturing is the driving force of our economy. But it is. And those weapons, we sell them to the military at an enormous profit. Enormous profit. There's no bottom line on weapons manufacturing that we won't pay. Because the United States, we're a war economy. And we send our soldiers over to die without a care. But when it comes to weapons manufacturing, we care a lot. And if you've been watching the president's journey through Eurasia or Indo-Asia or whatever they're calling it, you'll see that he steadily is trying to sell weapons to South Korea, sell weapons to Indonesia, sell weapons to Japan. Each country that the president's gone to, he's tried to negotiate contracts for our weapons manufacturers. Because that is our main export. That is our main profit. And it's, whether you like to face it or not, the driving force of the United States is war. That's why our economy exists, is because we profit off of war. So, I try not to let these things go on too long, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in. With all that said, I'll talk to you really soon. Have a great day out there.